Yes, that's right, everybody. It is time for another episode of We Know Severance here on RHAP. We know scriptedtv.com. We know severance.com here. That is the URL you want to check out if you want to make sure you'll never miss an episode of the We Know Severance podcast here on RHAP. And we are back one last time talking about Severance Season 2 with a much delayed, albeit much ballyhooed, final theories and feedback show here for the Severed Faithful. I am Josh Wigler, also known as Also Josh. I am joined, as always, by my partners in crime, the incredible doctors Melissa and Amanda. Dr. Melly Dubs, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. You know, we couldn't counter program ourselves on
That's
our
true.
friends' podcast, our close personal friends.
That's a struggling podcast that needs
Yes.
listeners. We didn't want to oversaturate the market, so we gave them their time to shine.
Can't compete. For those who don't know what we're talking about, earlier, if you're a fan of We Know Severance, then you already know that the official Apple Severance podcast, hosted by Ben Stiller and Adam Scott, director and star of Severance. If you didn't know that, would be hard to not know that, and also be checking out Severance podcast. I think that they previously announced their fandom of our podcast earlier in the season. We played a little clip proving such a thing. Well, their little boutique Severance podcast needed a little boost at the end of the season. So the good doctors and myself joined Ben Stiller and Adam Scott on the official Severance podcast for a post-season episode. We were like a 30-minute guest spot on a podcast that also featured creator Dan Erickson as well as SZA. So a Severance podcast featuring Ben Stiller, Adam Scott, Dan Erickson, creator of Severance, SZA, and the most important famous people, the three of us. If you have not yet checked it out, we encourage you to do so. We hope you understand why we were a little bit late. Wanted to give that piece a little bit of a time to shine. Still pinching myself. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't even keep a straight face as you're like this boutique podcast.
It was cool.
You're being cute about it. We were so excited. We were such just completely tickled geeks about it. It was such a delight. I think first of all, SZA, Dan Erickson, Ben Stiller, Adam Scott, just the type of company I expect myself to be in, like the types of circles I'm used to walking in.
Yeah.
They were so cool. First of all, Ben and Adam were so welcoming and great to talk to. They were really, really interested in all of the really nerdy brain stuff that Melissa and I like to get in. Melissa, we went a little deeper than I expected to in terms of steering into the neuroscience with them, but they were so into it. It was awesome. Such a delight. It was really, really awesome that they featured us on their official podcast. And what great, wonderful, creative people to talk to.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was wonderful. Yeah, we got to talk about Survivor, all the important stuff.
We checked all the boxes, really. And I was just on the other side beaming like a proud papa. I was like, not to brag, but in my position as the Hollywood Reporter's very own Josh Wigler, I've interviewed a great many people in my days at MTV and such. I've had a very, very
hat for Josh.
Josh hobnobs with the glitterati on the rag.
On the rag. You should
That's a normal Wednesday for
you
Josh.
should see which HBO star I've been texting with recently. Those texts
are
lit right now. Listen, it's not that big of a deal. You two have your science degrees. I've got my entertainment geek street cred. So it was incredibly cool for me to do this and to have our podcast get to that level that we were talking to those guys. But I was just like, I was like, this is like especially so cool for my friends. And I was listening to the two of you talking science and like trying not to interfere too much and just like beaming the entire time. I was like, they're doing so good. They're being so chill right now, because if Ben and Adam could see that all of our texts are literally just the words, over and over again.
I got zone minutes on my Fitbit. That like registered as a mild workout for me.
It was awesome.
It was really exciting. And I want to say to all of our great listeners, especially the folks in the Discord who have been with us since way back, since we started this whole Severance podcasting thing 3+ years ago.
Back on the post-show recaps.
Back on the post-show recaps era. It was really just as meaningful to see people cheering us on and listening to us on the podcast and sharing that experience because like that's who we are. We are all, this was for all of us guys, all of us nerds on a Discord talking about a TV show. That was that moment. So I just wanted to shout out all of our great listeners for being part of that, and new listeners who have since found us because we appeared on the official pod,
which is cool. We of course we're going to get into theories and feedback and people who wrote in, and a bunch of people who wrote in for this episode being like, just found you on the Ben and Adam podcast. I'm so glad we did. So welcome to the show. Go back and listen to we've got a healthy back catalog.
You got a lot of time you can make up.
We've done a lot. We've watched all of season 1 in the real time. We then did a bunch of stuff between seasons 1 and 2 to pass the time, and then in the lead up to season 2, we rewatched season 1. Then we watched season 2 in the real time. Now we're here. Now we're gonna have to wait for season 3. We'll have some off-season podcasts for sure. When and where and what they will be. We are not announcing any kind of media club here. We are not attaching ourselves to any sort of specific thing. But of course, we will show back up between now and the return of Severance season 3. So if you're looking for ways to pass the time and you're just finding us, and even if you're not just finding us, but you're just a Severance obsessive, I really do recommend going back and listening to the full run because I think our opinions change throughout the thing as more information gets unveiled about the show. One thing that is consistent from start to finish, we love Severance. We don't just know Severance. We love Severance. And so this is, getting close to the end of the self-congratulatory portion. I promise we have actual substance to talk about here, but we've been very touched by all the messages we've received, not just in this moment, but throughout the season. And we would not be doing this podcast. I mean, we might be doing this podcast if it was just the three of us and no one else listening. It's totally possible because it is such a fun show and we really have such a good time doing it. But to know that there's so many people out there who are cheering us on and enjoying the shows, it's beyond our wildest dreams. We really appreciate all of you. So thank all of you for knowing that we know Severance is cool.
Couldn't do this without the you are.
It's true. The various.
I think it was one of those things where we wanted to keep the surprise for the folks, any of our listeners. And so instead I told everybody else in my life, it was, I was like, random strangers at the grocery store. I was like, by the way, did you know I was talking to Ben Stiller? Yeah. So many people who were like, okay, so what are you doing? You've got this podcast. And I was like, okay, long story short,
it's a whole to-do.
Yeah, which unfortunately has now meant that the rumor mill has resulted in my actual work knowing about the podcast.
Oh boy.
And one of my senior directors being like, that's so cool. And I was like, yep, it is. And I totally, any time that I've ever railed against the capitalist machine has not been reflective of my
not you guys.
How about you guys?
You're one of the cool bosses.
You're capitalist.
Yes. Speaking of people finding the podcast, I got a text just 2 days ago from a number that I've lost so many phones since I had this number that I no longer had it saved.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, I'm listening to your Severance podcast. So I had to say, new phone, who dis? And to that reply, I discovered that this was my clinical supervisor from my postdoctoral fellowship who supervised me in assessing traumatic brain injury patients on the inpatient floor, who was in fact listening to the podcast. And I said, Dr. Kelly Williams, I hope I'm not getting anything wrong.
Wow.
And she was very delighted. So this was great. She said that her daughter was listening to the podcast and said, Mom, I have this great Severance podcast for you. There's these 2 doctors on it. They're really smart. And also Josh. And then she checked it out and was like, oh my God, I trained that person. So very exciting. Word is getting out.
My great regret on the podcast is that I did not reveal that I'm a Nepo scientist, and that
Yeah.
my father is a very well established scientist as
Yeah. Oh,
well, who
yeah.
works at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. And I missed
Mhm.
my opportunity to ask them. That was a shout out to my father, of course. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Next time out, don't let me forget. I'm
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
ask
Next
about.
time we chat with our good friends.
Inevitably, right? I mean, we're on first name basis at this point,
Mhm.
so I think we can count on it. So it's been a minute since Severance ended. We have only had time to chew on this finale and to look back on season 2 and look ahead towards season 3, which is officially confirmed. Season 3 was announced on the day that season 2 ended. So we can say that here officially on the podcast that there will be a third season of the show. They've got a full writer's room. I think it's a fairly new writer's room. It looks like there's a lot of new voices that have joined the Severance team, which I think is exciting. Also daunting, I would think, for the
Yeah.
writers, because they have to really hop into some lore dense stuff. So good luck to all of them as a third season is officially in the works. Before we even dive into any personal theories or theories from the listeners, I wanted to ask both of you how Severance has sat with you in these weeks since it wrapped up. Mandy R, have you has your Severance innie just been on hold, or is your Severance innie still out here on the streets?
You know, the severance barrier does not hold,
Yeah.
Josh. I know that that's what they were testing down on the testing floor, but there are some things that seep through, and we talked about this with Ben and Adam a little bit. You can't completely suppress that experience. So, of course, I've still been mulling over Severance, and I find myself pretty quickly getting into these sort of big meta commentaries on how we watch television whenever I have an intense experience with a show like Severance, like something that means a lot to me. And, I end up reading the Reddit, listening to other podcasts, reading articles about it. And I can't help but get super wrapped up in the discussion around the show and it kind of pulling me into, this question of how should we watch TV? Can we just like what we like and leave it or that at that? Are there good shows and bad shows? Do I get it and other people don't get it? Or am I kind of being too in the can for a show that I love? All
Yeah.
of these things have been coming up for me. I have seen a lot of positive reactions to Severance season 2, but I've also seen some mixed reactions. And the mixed reaction that I see most often, and the one that I feel like I need to engage with, is this assessment of Severance, especially in its second season, as having stunning visual language, having the highest of high production value, great acting performances, but ultimately just being a show that is sort of spinning its own lore and
Yeah.
eating its tail and kind of creating these mazes that it can't find its way out of. And we're sort of stunned by the spectacle of it. But at the end of the day, is it really doing anything well? Or has it bitten off more than it can chew?
Like when you have a question about the quality of the show, all of a sudden Mr. Milchick shows up with a drum band, and you're like, "Oh, that's fun." Is that
Uh-huh.
happening? Is that
Yeah.
what we're being accused of?
And I mean, I listen to a lot of the Ringer podcasts about television, and I know that Andy Greenwald and Chris Ryan have been we're not big fans
Yeah.
of Severance season 2, and I do always feel the need, I need a direct line to them so that I can tell them every time I disagree with them, because I agree with them 70% of the time, and then 30% of the time I get so mad at them that I want to go to their house and just deliver a letter. I'm not
And
going to do anything violent.
and amazingly, what's happening right now is somebody is listening to you say that and it's like, "That's how I feel about you all."
Yeah,
No,
I'm sure.
exactly. And I see that coming too. And so sometimes there's a human thing where this show means a lot to us. We started watching it at the beginning and there's so many things we loved about it. And then we give it the benefit of the doubt, where other people who might have not resonated with it will say, like, this isn't working for me. This isn't working with, I don't want to do the work to give the show the benefit of the doubt. And two people who've had more of a criticism of season 2, I agree with some of the criticisms that I've seen. I think that Ragabi as a character didn't work that well. I had questions with how Cobell came in and out of the storyline, and could they have done that more effectively? Sometimes it felt like things were getting bigger than the show could really handle in the season. But overall, I do still think that the things that work about the show work so well. And when I hear criticisms that, we don't care about these characters, or there's no emotional truth to the story, or, this is not the kind of question that I'm interested in answering. Like, there's some things that I very, very firmly disagree with. And I think this show has a lot of sentimentality, a lot of heart. And I think that it's operating at like such a like the ambitions of this show to speak to the nature of the existential nature of being, like, who are you really, and then also deal with these bigger sociological issues of how does that human identity fit as a cog into a bigger machine that's serving a system that might be oppressive in some ways. I mean, I think that these are such big, interesting questions. And science fiction has a higher level of difficulty, and science fiction that's like original science fiction. That's not drawing on IP that we all know the rules of, of Star Trek, or we all know like the rules of how vampires work. I mean, like, we don't have, this show doesn't have
do we all know the rules of Star Trek, Amanda? Do you know the rules of Star Trek?
I don't even know that there are rules, but I assume that I would say that and people would say yes, you're right. But it just, this show had to make up this lore and build this world, and they chose to make it a lot like our world, and which also makes it more difficult. So I think that this show is extremely ambitious. You can ask, does it constantly live up to those ambitions? Maybe not. But I think it so often does, and it's doing it in a really clever and thoughtful way, that I give it more credit than a show that I've heard a lot of people say is the best show on TV this year, The Pit, which is great, and I love The Pit, but The Pit doesn't have to do all of the work that Severance has to do. They're very apples and oranges shows, but The Pit just can draw on what happens in emergency departments around the country and can draw on these other, like, this is a different show with a different scope. And I think I want to applaud shows for having that scope and having that ambition and for getting it right as often as Severance does. I think is extremely, extremely laudable. So, I mean, if people are going to talk to Andy Greenwald or Chris Ryan, or if you have a line to them, you can pass that on. And I know that, like, elsewhere in, that podcasting universe, Joanna Robinson has been much more of a fan of Severance. I feel the need to engage with this because I feel severed, because I know that I'm probably more biased towards forgiving this show for its faults than somebody else might be. But I also think that, the show has done some things so well, and that there's things that I really do feel like the detractors have missed, like the nuance and complexity of Milchick's story arc. I think that there are things that when I see, or even people like getting really hung up on how certain of these kind of mystery box things don't make sense, especially people, Melissa, who say that a marching band wouldn't remember how to play their instruments on the severed floor.
Have I got
a thing for you? But I mean, sometimes I do feel like I'm right. Sometimes I feel like I want to acknowledge my bias. But the short, I mean, this has not been the short answer, Josh. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. But I mean, at the end of the day, this show has engaged the passion of like so many fans. It's found a growing audience. It's gotten people talking, and television that does that is doing it right. Even if it's not for you, it's doing it right.
Yeah.
The other thing is, like, this show had to do something that The Pit hasn't had to do yet, and that's do it again. do it a second time, right?
Mhm.
And that is always so much harder. And I think I think we've talked about some of
Second
the
seasons are always graded, I think, on a harsher scale.
Mhm.
yeah, and it's because it's trying to live up to its own hype. And if we remember back to season 1, there was incredible hype. I think the season finale of Severance won like best TV episode of the year over on post show recaps, right? It was certainly
Mhm.
what I nominated for it.
The definitive arbiter of what is good TV was the
Yes,
post-show
as
recaps.
evidenced by the fact that it still exists.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
make that joke. I killed it.
Oh.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can I not make that joke yet? It's still a little soon. It's
Not
been a
yet.
year,
Not yet.
by the way,
It's been a
okay?
year. I know. Yeah. Yeah. we but no, I think you're right. I mean, like for me, it's funny. The two podcasts that I look back over doing that I'm like the most proud of are the ones that get to have these kinds of conversations. And
Mhm.
it's this and it's his Dark Materials that I did with
Mhm.
Rich back over on PSR because of all of the like religious allegory in that
Mhm.
story and like very intentional like the whole thing is like about killing God. So it's it was a very great conversation with that. But this is the next show that I've found that will elicit that much kind of introspection and application to our world. It's just so different to get to talk about a show that isn't just like, oh, what are these characters going to do? And look at this funny thing that
Mhm.
happened and whatever. But that it's like, okay, and what does this mean about the world that we live in and everything that's going on? And I think it's so if this show doesn't resonate with people, honestly, fine, because it resonates with so many people. And so like it doesn't have to be everybody's cup of tea, but it is absolutely our cup of tea and hopefully the listener's cup of tea. And there will be problems, there will be things that people don't like as much, but for me like it's really easy after the last 2 episodes that we got to forgive some of the things that people struggled with earlier in the season because we ended on such a high note and it's
Mhm.
how shows work, right? The how you end is so often kind of the lasting emotional memory before we go into season 3 and I think that there's such a good job and I think that we are hopefully because I think we sort of expanded this world a little bit in season 2, but the direction that we are going for season 3 is that we're back there. Like we are back on the severed floor. The main story beat that we have going into season 3 is that like the innies are taking over on the severed floor. So
Yeah.
they're not going to leave, right? So at least that storyline is back
You
there.
hope.
Yeah, like even if it's only for an episode, whatever, but I think that it will be again playing with the consequences of that action and all of the kind of resulting thing. And so I think that again, like the ability to sort of expand and contract our focus and on this world, I think is so smart because I think it helps us sort of realign with what makes this show what we connected with in season 1,
Mhm.
right? So we get to see this like bigger world. We got all of this world building and lore and stuff in this season, which I struggle with any sort of idea that like, oh, we can't like they've totally lost the plot or whatever, because I don't think we know the plot yet, right? There's still so many things that we're still
Mm.
figuring out that it's hard for me to be like, oh, well, they don't know what's going on because like how do we know that? We're just watching the show. Like
Yeah.
we're not in the writer's room. We don't know what the plan is. And so then the fact that then this next season, my hope is that it again sort of is a focus back on some of this stuff. And again, maybe speaking a bit more to some of those kind of class social issues that maybe we felt
Mhm.
a bit disconnected from this season. That is honestly the only criticism that kind of still sticks with me is just that was less of a focus this season. But that's okay because again, that isn't the only thing this show is. It is
Right.
also this character exploration. It is also this mystery box. And so, it doesn't have to always be the focus, but I would like it to get to be the focus
Yeah.
again going in now that we are at the place that we are in the story.
I will
Yeah.
say if the lack of class focus means a lack of Rickon, I'm especially out on it. If I
Mhm.
have my fundamental major critique
Yeah.
of season 2 of Severance is an egregious lack of one Rick and Laszlo Hale.
Mhm.
But I think
Yeah.
your mileage is going to vary on every show.
Yeah.
Some shows you're going to love, and then the show will continue, and you don't love it anymore. For I would say almost always those reasons for you will be valid. There are elements of this season that really did not work that well for me. That I wonder how will they work now that I know the full picture of season
Mhm.
2,
Mhm.
and like what will this look like on like a binge of like the season 1 premiere through to the season 2 finale. Like how much will change and what will season 3 change about a lot of this stuff. I was talking to a dear friend of mine who listens to this podcast and does not particularly enjoy Severance right now.
Hmm.
But I think that one of the reasons why I've had such a good time with season 2 of Severance is I'm in the tank for it. I'm incentivized to enjoy it because I
Mhm.
talk
Yeah.
about it for hours each and every week. And I think over the years, the shows that I've stopped podcasting about are the ones that haven't brought me joy. Or
Mhm.
sometimes a show that is like bringing me joy in spite of the show.
Yeah.
But that is
Yeah.
because of the conversation between the hosts and the friends that I'm making. In the
Amanda and
course
I know nothing about that, about podcasting about shows that we're not
Shows you
actually
don't like?
enjoying,
No.
enjoying talking
None.
about. No.
Certainly not. And so I think like often when people are like, hey, why aren't you podcasting about that again? It's like, because I didn't like it. Like a lot of people really disliked Westworld season 2 and onward. And I actually, I really enjoyed Westworld basically all the way through. And a big piece of that is one, I think I'm learning I'm a sucker for a mystery box show.
Mhm.
Straight out.
Mhm.
Like I just love that format. I love those vibes. It does not always satisfy. It does not always pay off, but I try to key in more on like the mood and how it's making me feel and the weirdness and are the characters working, and if the characters themselves aren't working, are the performances killer. And I think typically on these types of shows I'm more satisfied than I'm not. But with Westworld specifically, I was podcasting with the incredible Joe Garfine each and every week, and it was so
Yeah.
much fun to
Yeah.
chew on that and like respond to her enthusiasm. And here on Severance, I every week get to plug in with the two of you who I love dearly, whose brains I really appreciate, talking about the ways you appreciate the brains behind Severance, dealing with the brains of Severance. And so it's a little feedback loopy for me
Mhm.
sometimes, but I think that is one of the great joys of podcasting, not just doing the podcast, but listening to podcasts and engaging in the podcast and having this be a part of your routine, whether you take us on your drive or you take us on your run or you're cleaning your house and you're listening to us
Mhm.
because the people in your life maybe are watching Severance, but maybe they aren't. And you need people to talk about this kind of thing with. More often than not, I find that the people who are engaging in that, like, to the degree that people are engaging with this show in particular, there are definitely people who are writing in or talking and saying like, I'm not really enjoying the show that much right now, and here is why. But the here is why is usually quite thoughtful and always
Mhm.
like a hope towards, I think that maybe this could improve, or like I hope that it improves. Like there's always something, the heart is in the right place towards that stuff. But for me, in my time covering all of this stuff, and again, as somebody who hobnobs with the glitterati, I just am
Mhm.
really conscious of my time these days. And I wouldn't spend this amount of time and this amount of energy on a thing I don't like anymore. There are podcasts that I'm no longer on, and there are reasons for that. But if it's a show that I am going to, sit in front of a microphone for like 4 hours a week and dissect, you better believe that I am both A, incentivized to enjoy it, and B, I'm enjoying it. So there is, again, stuff that did not work for me this season, but I think that the community around Severance, for like even when the community around Severance is disappointed with Severance, I think it always provides a very compelling canvas to paint on conversationally, lots to dig into, and very rewarding on that level for me.
Can I make 2 more meta comments before
it.
we get into
Yeah.
the feedback? Because there's a couple other things about like the way we watch television now that I also think like affect the conversation around how good a show is. And I think a lot of people binged Severance season 1 and then went into Severance season 2 and had to experience the week to week release. And We are babies about television now. I'm covering The White Lotus over on Crying Laughing. Josh, you're covering The White Lotus for We Know scripted TV. And people are saying this is slow. Nothing is happening. And this expectation that every installment of a television show will meet and exceed whatever standards of excitement happened on the last television show, and the way that we grade a season that's currently happening against the seasons of the past is is fundamentally ends up setting us up for disappointment, because when we remember previous seasons of TV, we have the benefit of not only judging an episode for how it appeared in the real time, but also how it fit into the context of that whole season and the whole show. And we can look back at other seasons and say, oh my gosh, all of these exciting things happened. And the 1 hour of TV I just watched didn't have anything that met that standard. But stories have to be told at a certain pace. And I think sometimes you can very validly criticize the pacing of a season. But I do think when I look back, I'm looking at the season 2 episode list right now, and there are at least 5 of these 10 episodes that I think are in contention for the greatest episode of Severance within season 2. I think that there are some really, really great installments. Chikai Bardo, Woe's Hollow, the finale. I loved the first 2 episodes of the season. I also loved the third episode, Who Is Alive. So I do think that there's a lot of great single episodes that once we can take a look back, we might judge the season differently. And then the other meta comment I wanted to make is, once you're in the business of making a TV show, a multi-season television show, TV stuff happens, right? And writers come in and out. There's conflicts between creative people. Actors might decide that they don't want to be on the show anymore. And I think that some of this, as Severance goes on, the kind of pure idea that was born in Dan Erickson's head and somehow got realized in the first season is going to get complicated by real world TV things that happen. And, that's kind of part of what happens when we get to experience a multi-season series of television is, we can look back at our single season darlings like My So-Called Life and
Freaks and Geeks.
And obviously I haven't watched TV since 1993, but we can look back at those things and we can say, oh my gosh, that was so perfect. But when we ask for more, when we if we want to have nice things, then this is what's going to happen. And I think that some of that was felt in Severance season 2, some of those real world interference to what happens on a television show. I think some of that seeped in, and it's fair to criticize that. The thing I have the biggest question about is what's going to happen with John Turturro's character on the show. I know that he is not as in the can for doing future seasons of the show. I do feel like I can sense that there's a question mark around his continued involvement.
He suggested to me when I spoke with him for THR that there's a lot more he wants to do with Irving. So
I feel like you are the only source though that points in that direction, Josh Wigler of THR.
I am a primary source.
You are a primary source.
I'm a primary source. I could check the tape. I can check the vibe from Turturro in that conversation. He sounded pretty down to do a third season to me.
I hope so.
The other thing is this season took risks, right? It made so many big swings in terms of entire innie, entire outie episode, Woe's Hollow, all of and even again, the Cobell episode that was maybe to mixed reception, Gemma's episode, so many of these things would have been unimaginable when we were watching season 1, right? And so I don't want Severance to feel we have to try to repeat exactly season 1 in order to recapture all of that magic. I want it to keep taking these chances because we get some great stuff out of it. And so again, not all of it may be 100% successful, but I don't think that the alternative is better for a show to be only playing it safe and trying to just do exactly what it did over and over again.
For sure. There were growing pains here for sure, though. And a lot that was
Mhm.
reported about the season.
Yeah.
Like Matt Bellany had a big report about the woes, if not hollow, behind the scenes during the
Yeah.
production of this show. The strike happens, as Amanda's alluding to,
Mhm.
real world television stuff. Even the first season is being created in the wake, in the midst of
Of
COVID.
COVID, yeah.
So, there's been a lot of things that have impacted the show, and season 2 on a creative level specifically, and I'm sure then also on like a production level specifically, that I think season 1 is built in isolation and it really pops. Season 2 is built with the expectations from season 1. It is no longer built in isolation. And I do feel a little bit, especially from like some of those reporting, some of the reporting around some of the troubles that plagued production on the second season of the show, and then some of the ways in which it's presented, it definitely feels to some extent that there are moments where like the train is being built as it goes. But I think even within that, first of all, like, I don't think the train crashed. I think the train got to where it needed to go. And I think, like, frankly, like, the train is still like barreling forward by the end of season 2. I'm very, very hyped about the setup for season 3, as Melissa was talking about earlier. But I also think that there's so many lessons that are hopefully learned from the I think like in many ways like a harder job making season 2 of this show. Ben Stiller, everybody is out here saying they want to get the show on a faster timeline. George R. R. Martin has said the same thing in the past. So like I'm
So take that to the bank.
I am not going to bank on anything. I am going to certainly not, announce a media club that by the time we've reached 12 months, the show will be back.
We've learned our lesson, folks.
We learned our lesson there. Like my expectations about the show coming back soon are frankly very low. That might not be what you want to hear, but that's how I'm going to remain optimistic about it. But it seems like, they've got a writer's room that's already been assembled that had been at work reportedly longer than, with some significant amount of lead time before the season 3 official renewal came through. Stiller out here saying we want to get it out faster. I think that there's reason to hope that they have worked out some kinks over the making of season 2. Sophomore seasons are always difficult, or are often difficult. Sometimes sophomore seasons are the best seasons of a show, and I don't know that we'll end up saying that here with Severance. I think for me, pound for pound, I'm a season 1 man, but what I loved about season 2, I really, really loved about season 2. But I'm very, very excited about when they do get their act together here and they really start, and maybe their act is already together, that season 3 will not just be made in a tighter way, but I think will feel tighter as well, while still, Melissa, to your point, I think still being able to like take big swings and present the show in ways that are different from how we've consumed it so far. That's, my optimistic view, baked in with a little bit of like, we might have to wait a little while, but
yeah. Also, I think this is true. I think this is the first time that Ben Stiller has done a multi-season show in terms of like
first
directing.
time. Yeah.
So like that's incredible. I think they mentioned on their podcast like him and John Turturro both being like, we don't really know how to do this like TV, like multi-season thing.
They're film people, Turturro, a theater guy, like there's, like limited series, Escape at Dannemora, like there's, there are
the Ben Stiller show from 1990.
The show that Amanda watched before Severance.
Yep.
So there's, there's like the closed loop story, right? Like a story with a beginning, middle, and end. And that's what they're used to. This is a very different animal. And so I do think that there's a degree of like, a degree of difficulty for some of these like A-list talents is like definitely like what is Miss Wong's instrument, the theremin?
The theremin, yeah.
Tiniest theremin in the world. Play a song on that right now.
Yeah.
Like incredibly talented, established people, and I don't want to be like, oh, woe's hollow is they for this really incredibly hard job that they've got. But it's just not a gear that they're particularly used to. And I think season 2, I hope season 2, it seems like season 2 provided them with some valuable lessons about making multi-season television.
Yeah. And Apple is in. At the time of recording, we are 24 hours, less than 24 hours away from a big event that they held at Bell Labs in New Jersey at the very building where Severance is filmed. And there was this amazing VIP event with all of the cast and Dan Erickson and Ben Stiller in attendance. I'm seeing amazing pictures on the Reddit. I was protesting all day yesterday, so
Well, good for you.
I couldn't make, but I mean,
Outside
like
of Bell Labs, right?
outside of Bell Labs, I was protesting Lumon.
F you, Lumen. Yeah.
So, I mean, and I'm here enjoying my Severance swag that I received in the mail. I have my Lumon mug. You might have
Not
seen if you're
doing much
watching
to
the
help
video.
your argument of bias, Amanda. You've
No,
been
I know.
caught.
I know. Hey, that's what I'm saying. If you want this kind of press on We Know Scripted TV, you know exactly what to do. I've got my Lumon goat here.
Dr. Amanda fights corruption at every turn. Also, Dr. Amanda, I can be bought though.
I can be bought at
I
the right
can't be
price.
bought with mugs and candles.
My
Stuff goes.
outie enjoys scented candles, which
Yeah.
actually this is fake news. My outie does not enjoy scented candles.
Really?
But I
You
do
don't like a scented candle?
too strong. Too strong usually.
Oh,
Too
okay.
yeah. And I got this cute little pineapple.
Don't candles just have scents anyway?
Like a beeswax candle is pretty nooch. It's pretty
Yeah.
neutral.
Yeah. Yeah. You need a
Mhm.
nooch scented candle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I get that.
It's a bit much. All right.
Well, this is a great performance review, I think,
Mhm.
of season 2 of Severance. I think a performance review of the conversation around Severance as well. Of course, there are still many lingering mysteries, and the great thing here, we've got way more feedback than we can even begin to put a dent into on this podcast. So the good news is we're not going to have answers to any of this stuff for a long time. So there is a lot in here already that we can chew on in the off season during some sporadic off season podcasting. But there are already, I think, some things that we've talked about in this episode that we received as feedback that I'd like to bring into the conversation. I would like to begin with a new listener to We Know Severance. Shout out to Emma. Emma wrote in and said, I just started listening after hearing you all on Ben and Adam's podcast,
Yay.
and I am so effing glad I did. I hadn't really been able to dig into this show from the science angle, which is generally my whole ass jam. And finding out there was a podcast hosted by not one, but 2 neuroscientists, and also Josh, was dead ass one of the most exciting moments in recent memory. So first of all, shout out to Emma for all of that.
Thank you.
Emma also had a lot for us, a really big email that we cannot take apart in its entirety. But Emma had a lot for us on the subject of 3 specific characters who we have mentioned here, I think probably more than almost any other character that we've talked about on this podcast thus far. I believe we have not even said the word Dylan yet. So 42-ish minutes into the podcast, I'll say the word Dylan. But these characters being Emma's very favorite, Miss Cobell, as well as one of all of our favorites, Irving, and then one of our characters who is perhaps not one of our favorites, Ragabi. And Emma, who feels like Ragabi is a character that is perhaps getting some unfair criticism. Emma says, I have a lot to say about the Ragabi criticism that I won't get into here. But for now, wants to talk about how that is who Emma believes Irving is working with. And I think has a pretty compelling case. Emma writes, I think Ragabi worked hand in hand with Cobell on the initial development of the actual severance procedure, and that early tests of the chip were on veterans with PTSD who were probably compensated. This tracks with the missing 6 years of Irving's Lumon employment. Emma, by the way, is paying very close attention to the timing on certain events. So Emma says 6 years of Irving's Lumon employment tracks with this. Continues and says, I think Ragabi was the original doctor on the testing floor, and that she and Irving knew each other and shared the same concerns with the direction of the program as James took ownership and Cobell was sidelined completely. She stayed on as an employee and was there when Gemma first came in, but possibly leaves in protest after Allentown when it becomes clear that the chip's development is about to go off the deep end. on rewatch. In addition to keeping track of the days, Emma says, I wanted to track the timing between Irving's phone booth calls and Mark's reintegration process with Ragabi. During the first call, right before Mark starts reintegrating, Irving leaves a message telling Ragabi that his quote-unquote innie got the message regarding the exports haul. Ragabi's approach to Mark's reintegration remains cautious and conservative while Irving is still on the severed floor. We know Ragabi uses a burner phone, and when Irving leaves the message on Monday evening that he was fired and that he thinks they figured out what his innie was up to, she was busy with Mark and likely not focused on checking her voicemail. However, the next we see of her is the next day with Mark in the basement, emphatically asking if he remembers a black hallway. And her demeanor is completely different. She's gone from cautious to an almost careless sense of urgency, which tracks with her having had finally listening to Irving's message. And with Irving gone and Petey before him, they have no one left on the floor to find the testing floor, with the hope being that Irving was able to communicate the message before being fired. Ragabi obviously doesn't know that Cobell was let go, and considering her knowledge of what Lumon is capable of with regard to defectors, her response to Devon's calling Cobell, which she did before Ragabi decides to take off, is entirely logical. So those are Emma's thoughts on why Ragabi is the one that Irving is working with and not Cobell, as we have been wondering ourselves.
Yeah, that is a fantastic feedback email, Emma. I love all of that. I would love to see this piece of the story fleshed out in the next season, which is part of why I hope we get more Irving, or if we don't get more Irving, we at least get more of this background to his storyline, because I do think that Ragabi has felt unsatisfying as a character, but I don't think it's necessarily a fatal flaw if we can't, address it in the future. And obviously, she's played a very important role. She has a history with Cobell. I think that that's a very compelling case for why she would be communicating with Irving. I do think that there's some reason to believe that Irving is not communicating with Cobell. Like, I think that there's some kind of mismatch with information that she should have known if outie Irving was the person doing that. So that's a great theory, and I would love to get more of integrating Ragabi into the story, maybe even bringing back something up with Petey or Petey's family from season 1, because we know that Ragabi was working with Petey. The idea that the reintegration process, I think, was much slower and less impactful than viewers were hoping for was one of the pacing issues with season 2 that I've seen quite a few people raise. I don't think the show is careless enough that they're going to act like no reintegration happened. Like, I think we're going to get more from that, but I understand people feeling that way.
Yeah. That was a question that we got from the Ben behind the curtain who asked why what are we supposed to take from the reintegration plot? Is it slowballed because it's not actually working, or are we going to see it taking fuller effect for Mark while he's leading a revolution?
Yeah, I was thinking about this coming in. And so I'm very glad that Emma pieced it all together, because coming into this podcast, I was like, Ragabi is my number one candidate for who's on the other end of the phone with Irving. But I had not bothered to go through and like piece together the timeline. So that's so exciting.
And I have not double checked the timeline. I'm taking Emma at her word. It's a very long email. And if you write a very long email, I assume that you are paying close attention to the show.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. That's why my dissertation is hundreds of pages, so that they don't, they just take it as a
can't question you at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to read all that.
Actually, they did. They did for several hours, actually. I had to stand up there and answer questions about it for a long time. But I think that it's interesting. I think that unfortunately right now, Ragabi is a plot device and not a character. And so if she is to take on more importance in this story, then I would like to get to know her as a character and not just as a plot device. I do wonder, my thinking about the reintegration piece of it and why the pacing of it was so different for Petey versus Mark, like why Petey seemed far more integrated, is I wonder if Ragabi says like, I'm better at it now, but what if she is just more cautious at it now? What if what she is doing, even with the flooding the chip of it all, is not the same way that she approached it with Petey, and that she is trying to avoid this mistake of the past?
Yeah,
So
like killing the person is not
is
being good.
unideal,
It's not
right?
good. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
typically frowned
It's
upon.
it's a very serious adverse event.
Yes, yes. You're going to get that flagged in the clinical trial for sure. So that was sort of my thinking, is that part of the reason why? The other thing is just that I know that, speaking to the timing of the episode, I don't know how long the overall course of this season is, but we're talking days to weeks, right? Like, we actually don't, I think that we don't know how long PD, like outie PD, was maybe undergoing a reintegration process prior to being let go. And so I think that there's some stuff to maybe think about there in the off season about the timing of things and how many days Mark has actually been, quote unquote, reintegrated or reintegrating. And could this be kind of a gradual process that will happen over a few days, and over maybe the next few days, this early, like season 1, or sorry, season 3. So
yeah, and I do think it's fair that even if you can logic something out, you can still criticize the pacing for how it's revealed in a show.
sure.
Like, even if in the internal logic it would make sense for the reintegration to not advance, you can still say that it didn't really work narratively. But I do think, for, some criticisms I've seen have said, like, oh, that's all reintegration is, and it ended up having very little impact. I would be shocked if we don't have serious implications of reintegration in season 3 when any Mark is stuck on the severed floor.
Totally.
Like, I don't know exactly how long we're going to be on the severed floor or how, but if they completely drop this ball on reintegration, I would be very, very surprised. I don't think we've seen the last of what those consequences will be.
I like Ben's suggestion, the Ben behind the curtain suggesting, like, are we, maybe it's not why necessarily we're putting it off, but like, will the real ramifications of Mark having undergone this procedure start to go down in season 3 while he is mid-revolution? Because think about all of the possibilities from that. Ragabi's not down here with him. Cobell is currently not down there either. If he gets sick and if he needs medical attention, it's Dr. Douchebag down on the testing floor,
Hate that
right?
guy.
Who has a very inappropriate interest in Gemma. And so right now we're assuming that the innies who have conquered the severed floor, Lumon on strike, that they've got all of the leverage. But what happens when Mark starts getting sick, and what kind of leverage do the Milchiks and Dr. Maurer and even Jamie Egan, if he's down there too, which I still think he's down there, but I'm not 100% sure if he's trapped down there as well. But like, what's the hostage negotiation looking like down here? Not just like how Mark is, going to bleed in and out between both of those floors, and like, innie and outie sort of mixing and merging. That's definitely not done, because that was happening already, and nothing has happened that's changed that. He was having flashes as recently as, right before the final episode or so. So what does that mean if he starts having like some bad episodes there, or needs to have the process like continued? Is this going to lead to an unexpected team up between him and some of the doctors of the testing floor? Are the doctors of the testing floor going to end up holding Mark hostage? What will all of that look like? So I think reintegration not being fully solved here in season 2, it works for me if it's, theoretically, that's like answering that question, I think, is part of the long haul of the show. I don't even know that we would get a full concrete answer to it in season 3. I would maybe try to adjust people's expectations on that, because I think fully resolving reintegration, to me, kind of feels like, in a way, the end of the show. We have to advance it, and we have to advance it meaningfully. And I think that depending on how season 3 goes, we could look back at season 2, and it was advanced meaningfully by beginning the procedure for Mark. And it might be a much longer arc in terms of how he deals with it. And let's say he gets reintegrated and innie Mark and outie Mark become one person by the end of season 3. What happens next? Does he have to lead the charge on reintegrating other people? Do other people not want that? So I think that this is a big story. I think this is one of the big stories of Severance. It's not as simple as like knowing that what they were refining was like Gemma's personalities, like this whole thing, and like creating multiple innies. Like that's a great sort of like why did the plane crash, right? Like why did the plane crash? Sorry, Melissa, doesn't
It's
solve.
okay. It's okay. I knew it was a lost reference. It's fine.
Why did the plane crash is not like the thesis.
I've seen episode 1.
Of why did the plane crash is not the thesis of Lost. So you can give us that answer relatively early in the run. What happens when these characters reintegrate is right in conversation with who are you, the central question of Severance. So I'm expecting it to take a while for that to feel like fully done. I don't think that's fully done for me until much closer to the end of the show.
Right.
Yeah.
Did we get feedback, Josh, about what exactly they're doing on the testing floor? What MDR is refining? Because obviously in this finale episode, we find out what Cold Harbor is. We find out what Lumon needs Gemma for, like how this is integral to what they're doing. What were people's thoughts about? Did we get any feedback about that in particular? And if people felt satisfied with that? Because that's one of the mystery box mysteries that the show promised to deliver. Do we think that we've answered that and put it away?
I don't think we've answered it completely and put it away. And I think that in terms of like some of the unanswered questions of the show, and I can't round up there were a lot of emails about like, here's my list of questions that are unanswered. And this consistently came up as like, well, we got like, again, like meaningful advancement on the question, but I don't know that we have it like totally tidied up. For one, we have it to a good degree with what Mark was doing with Gemma, but what's Dylan doing? What are these other people who are doing refinement? What are they refining? And I think a lot of questions, and in some cases, just outright disdain for the doubles that are on the other side of those computers. Like, what are we doing with all of that? I think some people have some issue with that. No, this doesn't feel totally resolved to a lot of the people who wrote in with like their roundups of season 2 unanswered questions.
So I have theories.
Yes, please.
I have theories. And I did kind of jumpstart my brain again by perusing the Reddit this morning, as I am wont to do on a Sunday morning. And I do think it's pretty clear that the other MDR refiners they're all working on Gemma, and that there is like some of the rooms are files. Like I think Tumwater is one that Dylan worked on, and I think that is a room, one of the 25 rooms.
Yeah, it is.
Even though Mark says he did 24 already, all of MDR was working on Gemma. I think it was a happy accident for Lumon that the spouse of the testing subject is very, very good at making these innies, and other people are just kind of okay at it, right? So everyone is working on Gemma. I think there's one testing subject on the floor at a time. Before Gemma, it was somebody else, and that was who Dylan and Irving and Petey were working on before Mark joined Lumon. But everyone is working on Gemma. Mark is just the only one who's good at it. So that's, I think, my first theory that I think is confirmed in the text of the show.
Yeah, Jarrett had wondered if Mark had refined 24 files, and if each represented a different innie of Gemma, then who were the others refining?
Yeah.
And your answer to that would be like they were also working on refining Gemma.
I think they were also working on refining Gemma.
How does that then track with Dylan? Is like consistently refiner of the quarter.
I was thinking that too. Yeah, I don't. Is it just that Mark like messes around so much that he's faster when he's actually doing it, but he just like doesn't work as hard as Dylan does?
Yeah, I think he did Allentown really quickly, and he was like a prodigy. And then it doesn't seem like he was incredibly distinguished otherwise. So maybe there's more of a history of everybody's performance on the severed floor. But I do think Cold Harbor was one that they knew that Mark needed to do. And Cold Harbor is a different room from the other rooms. And I wanted to point this out because there's a question about what's special about Cold Harbor. And every other room that we see Gemma go into, it's without any context, the experience itself is extremely unpleasant.
Yeah.
You don't need to know, you don't need to have had a history of experience with going to the dentist to hate it when
Totally.
somebody sticks a drill in your mouth. You
Yeah.
don't need to have a personal history with plane crashes, loss notwithstanding, to like be on a turbulent plane and freak the F out, right? But if you don't have your own personal lore and you go into a room and are told to disassemble a crib, that is not an experience that within the sealed room of that floor is inherently traumatic. The reason it's traumatic for Gemma is not because, so it seems like they are testing the barrier of how any information flows to outie Gemma on the testing floor, every other room, because after she's in the room, they ask her questions about her experience. They do physiological tests. They want to see how much the outie of Gemma is experiencing whatever trauma happened in the innie room. In Cold Harbor, it's the exact opposite. They want to see how any Gemma is responding to the trauma of the and maybe you could argue it's both, but it's different with regards to what is being blocked out and what is the purpose. Now, Lumon is a pharmaceutical company, one of the biggest money makers, one of the most dubious pieces of business that the pharmaceutical companies have gotten into is pain management. And if you think about severance as being the next advancement, kind of this post-opioid pain management system, where instead of being, so where you can disassociate effectively when a trigger of something unpleasant is about to happen. And it's not going to be a spatially dependent sort of situation. It's going to be a triggered by specific, either extremely individual traumatic triggers or maybe something even broader. We talked a lot about what could the military implications of this be. And I think that this kind of testing is a new severance application where there's a trigger induced severance that begins to happen. And while all of these other rooms were responding to something more generic, that this Cold Harbor room is a very specific personal trauma. So, for example, how does a severance chip know that cribs are triggering for this one person, as opposed to these things that are more sort of generically fear-inducing across the board?
And sort of this particular ratio of tempers, quote unquote,
Right,
of like that
right.
would be elicited from these experiences. I think that's really smart. I mean, I agree with you, the idea that I think they're all working on sort of the same thing, and it is just maybe what Mark is doing has been more particular, right? Like this more specific experience of Cold Harbor, for example. Um, and I think that it makes a lot of sense that this one is different because it is this kind of very personal experience. And it's really interesting to think about the idea of the evolution of Lumen and the fact that we started in ether and topical salves and now we're going to severance. It does sort of feel like we are just continuing down this same pathway. And I think it's interesting to think about the idea that if a company's goal is like an end to pain at all costs, essentially, like what are you willing to do? What are people willing to do to avoid pain of emotional, physical,
Mhm.
whatever? And then like what are the consequences of seeking a pain-free life, and what does that mean for people who like who are the kinds of people who are willing to do that? What have they experienced in their lives? Like I think that there are so many really interesting questions that we can ask about why this is Lumen's primary goal, who are the people that they are aiming for, and yeah, like how much money is involved, like how much are people willing to pay to avoid having to ever go to the dentist again, right? Like I think that that's really interesting, and I think it makes so much sense, and it is different than so much of the speculation that we have done around immortality, and the idea that MDR was working on this sort of idea of how to like, you know, create a consciousness that would then be implanted and whatever. And I know we got really hung up on Jamie Egan's use of the word revolving. And so I don't know that that is not a part of what is going on here, because, you know, perhaps, you know, aging and death and whatever is kind of the ultimate pain in some ways, right? So so maybe there is still an aspect to that, but I do think that it is so easy for people like the Egans to feel like they are called to this higher purpose, right? This end of all pain, and to be sort of guided by that principle, and what that all of the kind of fallout from that we will get to see, and the kind of negative consequences of this quest for like a solution to pain.
What are we thinking about the finale's turn with Mark, Gemma, and Helly? Because I think this ended up being a much bigger conversation than I even anticipated it might be, in the fallout of a lot of people were pretty upset. A lot of people were pretty upset with Mark's choice. Amanda, you're in the Reddit minds. You had to see some of that.
Yeah, people are mad. So people are mad at outie Mark, and people are mad at innie Mark. And I think that people, I think that part of this comes from this really complex existential question that the show is interested in, that's really gets to the heart of like what makes a person? Who are we essentially? And I think a lot of folks out there have been team innie Mark. But innie Mark and outie Mark are not two different guys. They are the same guy. One of them, they just have different histories, right? And
sometimes different hair.
And sometimes different hair. And
outie Mark with the good hair.
Yeah.
And I think that the part of what Mark is a little bit of a selfish, avoidant person. Not, I think, not necessarily in a way that makes him evil or unrelatable or even always unlikable, but it would be, I think, a misstep for the show if innie Mark was much nobler than outie Mark is, because they are the same guy. And I think that people are mad at innie Mark for killing Gemma. I think is like part of the worst thing is like, okay, now she's sort of doomed to die because, you know, she's trapped here and you weren't able to extract her from Lumon. It's like a question of what would actually happen to Gemma in the moments that follow, where we end with the finale. Innie Mark is, again, I think, like, you know, he's making this sort of selfish choice to protect his life and his girlfriend's life in Helly. But one of the things that I've seen discussed, and I know that Dan Erickson has talked about this, is that the innies in season 1 were kind of like babies, and the innies in season 2 are kind of like teenagers. And there's like this,
they grow up so fast.
They do grow up so fast. And I think what we see in innie Mark and Helena, and, you know, even Dylan and Irving, is like that mix of brashness and naivete and idealism that is, like, at the same time, kind of the best and the worst of what we can be as people. And one of the things I love about the show is this idea that if you can go back and sort of distill the most essential part of yourself before that got weighed down with like expectations and traumas and failures, and if you could just kind of keep that light alive. So many of these things that we associate with being a child and being an adolescent, some of those things have to do with, our actual, development and our, our brain's maturational stage, but some of it just has to do with what we've experienced. And like this idea that we could kind of reignite that light and that passion that's associated with youth, but put it in the bodies and in the brains of these adult people, I think is something that I really enjoy about the show. And Innie Mark, I think, is trying to do that idealistic thing of, you know what, even if this is ultimately doomed to fail, even if I'm going to go down in a blaze of glory, I'm going to take this stand because that's all I have. All I have is myself and my choice in this moment. And maybe a more world weary version of Mark would just give up and do something else. But this version of Mark still has that passion. And I've seen a lot of, even Ben Stiller has alluded to this, that final frame of Mark and Helly is supposed to evoke the ending scene of The Graduate, which is, one of my favorite movies. And I think one of the most oft referenced scenes in
different movie. Sorry.
in cinematic history. And that is a moment of this kind of brash adolescent decision making to go out into the unknown. And ultimately, maybe, and this uncertainty and looming sense of doom, right, that comes from that, but also this feeling of I made a stand and that wonderful ambiguity of the two actors' performances there. I think that Innie Mark is like most teenagers, which is, he's kind of a jerk. He's kind of selfish. But if you sit down and you talk to him and you see what that passion is that he's fighting for, it's beautiful and it's inspirational.
I think that's really great. I think it makes so much sense. I'm not mad at Innie Mark for ultimately like getting Gemma out, but then staying behind and taking up the next cause, right? Like I think that it's not like he and Helly are there just, off like doing it in a room and like I suspect that they will be interacting with the other people down there, and they will be
there
part
might be
of this
some of that
say,
too.
I expect they will be off doing it in a room soon.
Yeah, I mean they are, effectively teenagers, but yeah. So I feel like there's just more for there's more of this cause for Innie Mark to take up, and I think that I don't really like distilling down this decision to just Helly versus Gemma because I feel like it's so much more complicated than that. I'm also very interested, as you mentioned, avoidant Mark, as we map the 4 to these different attachment styles when we're in here. I'm thinking Helly might be a bit disorganized, and maybe Irving's a bit anxious.
And I think that there's some, if you think about her childhood, there's some good research to suggest that would result in a disorganized attachment style.
And then we got, securely attached Dylan here. He's confident, he's working, he's doing great. My undergrad honors thesis was involved attachment styles in children and at-risk youth. So anyway,
season 3 they'll be undergrads, right? Now they're college kids. Kids who got to go and like face like, okay, well,
I was gonna say they're gonna be like young, blushing young adults, but I think
they've got to write essays like All Quiet on the Western Blonde.
Exactly. But I think it's so interesting, right? Like I think back, so I'm coaching university, college level a team right now, and it's so funny to talk to them because they are so, first of all, their little prefrontal cortices are not fully developed. Sometimes the decision making is questionable at best. It's such a like pinnacle of this stage of sports where they will do something like incredible and then immediately make like this crazy decision. You're like, why is
That's
that
what's
the
great
thing? But it's
about
like,
watching March Madness basketball.
exactly. They are like
yeah.
pumped with adrenaline and, you
Mhm.
know, their brains aren't fully developed and they're like, ah, and I was like, you just threw away after, you know, making this. Anyway, they're very fun. But they're also like so eager to learn. They ask such good questions. Um, they're just these like sponges of trying to soak up every piece of knowledge and every piece of information. And so I think it will be very interesting to see this like next stage of these innies as they continue to kind of, you know, when was the first time most of us went to a protest? It was probably about the age that like they are effectively now going into season
Right.
Although
3,
I'll
right?
tell you, a lot of people at the protests that I was at yesterday are over 60. So we could
Oh,
use
yeah,
some
that's
youth. We
happening,
could
huh?
use some youth in the movement right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
fair
kinda
enough.
nice, like, okay, boomers, like, finally, you know, like, show
Mhm,
up.
mhm.
Jeez,
Well,
my goodness.
it was funny. I was having this conversation the other day about like the I was talking with friends about like the political affiliations of our parents, and my mom was a like save the whales hippie of the 70s. So
Yeah.
she's been doing the protest thing the whole time. And you know, trying to take up that mantle. But yeah, no, I think it will be very interesting to see what is effectively a sit-in, like what is going on here
Mhm,
in this like um and some of that sort of aspiration and kind of dream for better that can come from not being so weighed down by the world.
Yeah.
And I think that that will be very cool. And then as they sort of experience some of these things and start gaining some of that wisdom that then comes, right? And the things that you will put up with as a young adult that you haven't yet learned are like not okay, and where those boundaries are. And like some of the things that I see as an adult now of like, oh, past Melissa would not have seen these red flags and would not have like understood that this is part of a bigger pattern, right? Would have been much more forgiving of people. So I think that there's
mhm,
um anyway, I think that there will be lots of interesting development of these innies as they continue to like experience the world, even if it is just their innie version of the world, and they, you know, will experience things like betrayal and love and
mhm,
you know, social movement and all of this kind
mhm.
of stuff.
I want to keep going with that because we have a lot of people who wrote in about like where season 2 left off and where season 3 stands to go, especially on like that revolutionary front.
Mhm.
But just to close the loop on Innie Mark's choice, because there are a lot of people who really did not care for it, but there are
Mhm.
certainly people who were in defense of it. And I really liked this from Ellis, who had written in. Ellis thought that Severance ultimately is about love, humanity, and personhood, and what happens to that under capitalism and oppression. And for
Mhm.
me, the 2 seasons work very well together to make this point. Relationships in season 1 are radical and revolutionary. The fact that love and friendship and human connection can emerge and flourish even on the severed floor goes directly against the all-encompassing capitalist control. It is through love and relationships that the characters grow and develop and ultimately are able to resist the conditions they are in. In season 2, we see how under capitalism, love and relationships can be co opted to individualize collective struggles. And the finale emphasizes that love is ultimately too messy to be controlled, and it will prop up in unexpected ways and derail plans. Innie Mark's final choice is driven by his love for Helly, but ultimately, for the first time ever, he chooses himself, which in the system he is in is the most revolutionary act he could have taken. Ellis says, I found the final choice of Innie Mark to be so beautiful precisely because making an irrational choice, irrational in quotes, simply because we love someone is one of the most human
Mhm.
things.
Yeah.
Abstract rationalizations and logical debates might be fun on the internet, but that's not how we live our lives in the moments it really matters. We are messy and we are contradictory, and most of the time, our choices are shots in the dark. Are you a Survivor fan, Alice? The
Mhm.
fact that Innie Mark's choice could be seen as irrational and quote unquote against the odds is not a narrative inconsistency. It's the whole point. It's him embracing his humanity. I
Yeah.
really thought
I
that
love
that
that.
was
Yeah.
nice put from Ellis. So, lots of people excited about the potential of the Innie revolution. Lots of people who have written in being, you know, I can't wait for season 3 and where we've left off, and then some concerns.
Okay.
and not concerns necessarily on like how is this like is the show going to do this well. Haven't seen too much of that. I will say, Melissa, I think you had said earlier that like, and if it's only just one episode, whatever. It was like I was sitting here being, it better be more than one episode.
I mean, I really want it to be more than one
all
episode,
of
for
season
sure.
3 in the
I
revolution.
want the lion's share of season 3
Yeah.
at minimum. I think that this is so like they've got the whole run of the place, and there's
Yeah.
reasons
Really
for them to
exciting.
not
It's
be able to
exciting.
access
I know.
everything. There's
I
reason for
know.
that. Like we just like spitballed like market could get sick, and so now they got leverage. So like it's a hostage situation. Like there's a lot of ways that this could go. So
they are literally holding themselves hostage against themselves.
It's crazy. So we gotta stay here for a while, or I'm going to be mad about it. So it's not that there are people who are like concerned about that necessarily, but there are people who are concerned about the innies. And Cindy is one of them. Cindy writes in and says, I'm really excited about the idea of an innie revolution and all of those possibilities. Then I remembered all of the protocols that Lumon has access to. Clean slate, freeze frame. They sound very ominous and make me afraid for all of the innies on the severed floor. Lumon still has so much power over them, even if the innies have the numbers. I guess I hadn't really thought about that because I'm like, oh, well, they've got the room with the stuff. So hopefully it's like the room with the stuff with the buttons and the keys.
Yeah, they have to do the.
Like, don't you have to be there to do the stuff? Because doesn't when she says, "Do it, Seth," and he, yes, do it, Seth. And then he radios someone. He's not pushing buttons.
That's right. So yeah, there's reasons to be concerned, but there's also a little bit of leverage that the innies have. Jaime Egan is down there, I think, presumably, if you can get your hands on Jaime Egan, that's quite a powerful bargaining chip to play.
Or what if they could just freeze them? They can freeze them, and then they could just go down to the severed floor, like, oh, look at all these sleeping little babies, these little toddlers. Then go down to the testing floor, and they're like, all right, James, come on up.
Maybe.
See how they're all sleeping, James? Like, oh yes, they're like the children I sired. And they go back upstairs, and then like they round them up, and when they all wake up, they're like not where they were.
That would be a big bummer.
That would be
a huge bummer. Yeah, I mean, so that's there's a lot. I think that first of all, we've seen that sometimes it seems like Lumon should have the power to do something quite easily, but yet they can't quite get it together, right? Like
so many funny emails about just like how shitty their security is. You can't round them all up, but a lot of you agree with us about this.
More invested in the arts and crafts over at Lumon than the security.
Arts and sciences, that's really where they're at.
Yep. After my own heart.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm a little concerned about where this could go, but not deep.
It would be a huge bummer if somebody that we haven't seen yet off screen presses a button and everybody goes to sleep and then they come down. I mean, I'm trying to think, does everybody like this? I mean, that we could be in a very interesting situation though, where Seth Milchick makes a choice, because I do think that we've gotten so much more of Seth Milchick's inner struggle. And while one of the criticisms I've seen of the finale is that after getting all of this from Milchick, the fact that he fights so hard against the revolution felt unsatisfying. Not for me, because I think that it actually is very, very complex for somebody to stand up to a power structure that they have been so embedded in and so abused by. And Tremel Tillman does so much in his performance with the nuance and the struggle and just the rage and the confusion and the self-defense. And I love the idea that Milchick could be down there with this uprising happening, and that he is going to be in a position where ultimately he might have to go through this painful process of rejecting what it's been seemingly his life's work to gain acceptance and power within this corrupt structure. He's not somebody that can be turned off with a button press. Neither is Jaime Egan. So there's a lot of interesting, even if they can disable the Lornes and the Marks and the Dylans of the world. Seth is an unsevered man. He said it himself. And I think that could be a place where we could see some really interesting character work that would support a plot where we have the innies staging their revolution for more than a couple of minutes.
Yes, and before the finale aired, we had gotten feedback from Dr. Steven, is what I'm going to call him. Dr. Steven, PhD, who had said that his prediction was that Milchick was going to turn code against Lumon in the final episode and help Gemma escape. That's not what happened, but that's absolutely still what could. Like, I mean, I don't know that he's going to help Gemma escape. She seems like she's kind of already on her way out, but you know, like, in the world where I'm trying to remember who wrote this and seeing if I can't find this quickly, but someone had asked, yes, it was Mr. Z. Mr. Z said, what's to stop Lumon from using the OTC on Gemma to turn her back into one of her innies now that she's out? So let's say like this is stuff that has to be done in Lumon on the severed floor for whatever reason, and then you could like pick that apart with your hammer and plot, you know, breakdown detection gear as much as you want. But let's say that that's how it works, and it's like it's in Milchick's hands to make those choices. Like he's the guy on the inside that Lumon has. If it's Milchick, if the question is like, what's to stop Lumon from using the OTC? And it would be because like Milchick would be the one who's in a position to do it. He might just not.
He might not
just
do
not
it.
do it. He might be or maybe he will. And it's going to be a longer, you know, journey for Milchick's rehabilitation, if it's even in the cards to take place. But I think those questions about Milchick moving into season 3 are really, really great. I think he is at such a fascinating precipice for me. I think we left Milchick exactly where I wanted to leave him, even if it's not where I thought I wanted to leave him. I think I thought I wanted to see him really turn heel on Lumon, but I think it's good that he wasn't fully there yet, because I think he has some repercussions to face. And currently where we leave him is he's facing a whole ass marching band of repercussions.
Yeah, I think this is so first of all, I think that so many of these questions around the OTC and everything, like this is everything that the show has told us up until this point is that happens in a room on the severed floor. So the innies theoretically could barricade that room. Like that could be a key part of this whole occupation of the severed floor. And I would not be surprised if we see that, right? That this is this is a whole part of what is about to happen. But I also think that it totally tracks with Milchick with this idea of like, he is starting to question some of his beliefs. He is starting to look at some of these kind of racial interactions that he has that are, you know, he's starting to ask these questions to Natalie, but he didn't get very far, right? Like Natalie didn't give him any sort of like, oh yeah, I agree with you. This is, you know, this is messed up or anything like that, right? All he's ever, and so far he's been very alone in this questioning, but I think the moment that this whole group of people starts looking at him saying, you are responsible for this, you are the ones that we are against, I think it is a very natural reaction for him to be like, never mind, I'm the pro Lumon guy, because this is like, you all are against me. And so I'm going to take this up even harder, right? Because now this is the thing that I have been painted with. And so now this is becoming more entrenched into my identity.
That's the way confrontation works. When we're challenged on something that is so core to our identity, we dig in more. It is going to take threat of his life. And I think the show has been doing the work of showing how he could make this flip and become part of the opposition, but that's not going to be without great conflict and struggle. And I think it's been beautifully paced and beautifully depicted. Of the criticisms you can have about pacing in season 2, for me, that is not on the table, because I think that this has been so well seated and well performed. And
you think Milchick is the story arc of the season for you?
I hadn't thought of it.
Come back
yet.
and do, I think, you know, some sort of award ceremony. I think.
You know what? I hadn't thought of it yet, but it could very well be. I think some of the best work that was done in terms of any character on the show this season, for me, is with Milchick, and I definitely think we're going to see more payoff in season 3 with that character, and I can't wait for it.
Yeah, I'm like running through my Rolodex of the other characters right now and sort of failing to feel like there's much competition there. And I think it's just because, like, for me, I think it would probably be Irving in season 1. And I think that it's sort of that similar kind of the absolute devotee starting to have other reason. And we didn't quite get to the whole "you smug mother effer" moment in Milchick, but like that does feel like the path we're on, which is very exciting.
Yeah. Do either of you have anything else you want to make sure we hit before we end this podcast? We will have many moons between now and season 3 and many shots to get back together, especially if people keep writing in severancerhap@gmail.com. We're monitoring the feedback line. Anytime we've got quorum for a feedback show, I'll send up the bat signal here to the crew. But if each of you has like one final thing about Severance season 2 you want to sign off with, let's do that. Mandy R, you got one?
Oh yeah, I do. The last thing I want to end with is the logistics of the marching band.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's do that.
So does Lumon have a marching band that checks in and shows up for work every single day? I don't think so. I don't think that they need that. I don't think that these are full-time workers that have a department somewhere on the severed floor. My theory is that you take some musicians, an actual marching band, or, you know, maybe this is something like a university marching band does as like an extra thing. Maybe Lumon has a relationship. Maybe this is Gant's college marching band. I don't know. But you take people who know how to play these instruments and know how to do a marching band. You get them together like a handful of times to practice a routine. And then you set it and forget it because they don't need to rehearse over and over again. Those innie marching band folks, they know how to play their instruments already. They've learned their routine. And then you can just dial them up whenever you need to. They check in and they are ready to go as if they just rehearsed yesterday. You can very pragmatically have a marching band on call at a place like Lumon. The Severance trip, we've talked about memory. They don't need to relearn their instruments when they become an innie because that is part of the procedural memory system, which is distributed throughout the brain. It is not located in the medial temporal lobes like their episodic memory is. They won't remember how they learned how to play those instruments, but they will show up on the Severance floor knowing how to play instruments and having basic understanding of how to do a marching band routine. Then they have to learn the routine. You do that. Maybe you get a couple of weeks of rehearsal, and then you just call them in when you need them, and they are ready to go.
Where else
honestly,
do you
even
get
like
these kinds of takes but the We Know Severance podcast?
Yeah, like, and well, and the thing is, like, the idea that, you know, you learn these routines, it does become muscle memory, right? You're not going through playing thinking like, okay, F, C, D, E, whatever, right? You just sort of go and do it. And so, yeah, I think that that makes so much sense.
Stop it out there, Reddit. The marching band makes sense.
Enough of this.
Stop it.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love
I
it.
mean, Reddit is obviously not listening to We Know Severance, and that is a problem. That's
Some of them are. Some of
in
them
and of
are.
itself, in and
I've
of
gotten
itself.
some nice comments. Some of them are listening.
Love that.
Nice. Okay, cool. I think that that's so fun. My theory with this marching band is that it is so I have this theory that I was thinking of the like a 1984 like naming of the departments, and does is there a chance that like cheer and merriment is the like military branch of Lumon? Like it is the opposite of cheer and merriment. And so they have a military
Interesting.
marching
Yeah.
band, and that is one of the things that they can do. But is it also the when we need to call in for extra security for whatever, that this is, and I was trying to think about it. I was like, MDR is sort of not, but like the idea of optics and design is sort of an interesting thing because so much of what they were doing was actually like not seen by anybody, right? Like that was sort of a front for all of the stuff that was very hidden and behind the scenes. So yeah, I was sort of trying to go through and think the mammalians were nurtured and then not so nurtured, right? They were not nurtured to full life. So I was starting to kind of think through some of these
His name is
departments.
Emil.
Yeah. And so yeah, anyway, that was sort of my
Melissa's
thinking.
goat
It's
is
like,
on the
what
way.
yeah. What is the opposite shipping to Canada, you know? What is the opposite of cheer and merriment? And is it that this is some
Ooh.
sort of military branch of Lumen? So that's my
Oh, interesting. Fascinating. Yeah. Melissa,
Sad
do you
and
have,
violent is the opposite of
do you
cheer.
want-
exactly.
do you want well, I actually was going to ask if we think that like will someone from the marching band like sort of step out from that crowd and become a named character on the podcast and show.
Wow. I would love that.
I would
I'd
hope
love that.
so. I would hope
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
And
There's
then
a
I think
lot
that
of
that
them.
would be particularly exciting if what you're saying, Melissa, is like, well, you know, maybe this is like a very regimented crew, and as talented as they are with an instrument of joy, perhaps they know their way around an instrument of death.
Yeah. I also loved that both myself and Ben Stiller shouted out Nick Cannon on our podcast summarizing this episode.
Yeah.
It's,
Ben Stiller
yeah.
loves Drumline, and
Yeah,
he
me too.
also watches The Traitors. I was like, oh my gosh, we
Yeah.
are all
Oh yeah,
we are
yeah.
all
The whole
besties.
traders conversation. Yeah. Jeez.
You got a lot to get into.
Mhm.
Melissa, one last thing about season 2 that you want to raise. Anything that we haven't touched on today. We will have other shots in the future, but one last shot today.
I was going to say the military beat was sort of the thing that I was thinking of the most, but I think that the other thing that I am my main takeaway from season 2 is that I am shocked at how many answers we have. Right? How many of the mysteries by the end of season 1 we already know the answer to. We know what's up with the goats. We know what MDR was working on. We know what happened to Gemma, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that there's, you know, we sort of solved some of the mystery around the birthing cabins. We know a bunch about Cobell's history. There's so much that we know now. And so I think that it is so interesting to think about, first of all, new mysteries that might come up. And again, it gives me faith in the fact that if there are things that we don't quite understand yet, we don't quite know the answer to some of these things, like we could still learn them, right? Like we got so much information in season 2 that the fact that not every single I is dotted and T is crossed is like, well, it's because it's not the series finale, thankfully. Like we're not done yet. So yeah, I'm very excited. I was not expecting this many answers by the end of this season. So I think that that's very exciting, and that this is not a show that is just going to expand and expand and expand and get more and more and more complicated without also trying to answer some of the questions that it's posing.
Yeah. Well, here we are.
Yeah.
At the
Josh,
end of
what was the just,
journey.
you know, for people that didn't know, Josh, you know, Josh is a very important person in media. I got to watch some of this stuff before having to podcast about it, pretending like he hadn't watched some of this stuff. What was the thing that was the hardest for you not to like talk about or spoil or whatever on the podcast?
I knew the ending a little bit in advance of you guys. And the thing that was so hard, I mean, in podcasting about like Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead, like I've gotten very good at you know, having read the books and like knowing what was coming and stuff like that. Like I can sever myself. It's weird. Like I do have like book innie, like source material innie, like screening source innie. So like if I watched an episode ahead of time, like I can compartmentalize that. But the thing that was hardest was the finale's setup for season 3 is just so crazy. And
It's
like
really
I just
exciting.
want to talk about that.
Yeah,
I want to
yeah,
talk
yeah.
about that a lot, which is why I'm very excited that we're all on the same
We're all
page.
here now.
We're all
Yeah.
heading into the off season now. And we all get to like speculate and wonder on this very provocative question. What now? because I think the what now is really, really exciting, depending on where they take it. If they just freeze them up and go down and, I'll be so upset. I'll be really, really upset. If we just tidy this up in an episode, I'll be actively mad about it.
That's when we riot. That's when we take over.
I will legitimately riot. I will be very, very displeased, because there's just so much potential with where they left us off that we need to. We cannot just new Caprica this shit. We need
I
to
have
stay
a
here for
vending
while.
machine that I can put in front of a door if we need to barricade.
Dr. Amanda
Yeah.
can be bought. Let's just say that again one last time. So I'm hyped. I'm very hyped for where we're going to go next. I'm very sad that we will not be doing this weekly. We've been doing this weekly now for like almost like 5 months.
Wow,
6
yeah.
months.
It's been a minute. Yeah.
Then we started we revved back online, I think in November to do the season 1 pods. So almost half a year we've been doing weekly Severance stuff here on RHAP We Know Scripted TV. So everyone who was here for the season 2 of it all, we are so appreciative of you. Everyone who stuck around, who came back with us or found us through the season 1 rewatch, we're so appreciative of you. Everybody who's been with us from the jump, oh my goodness, we are so appreciative of you. We're very appreciative of all of the people who make this show. Of course, grateful to Ben Stiller and Adam Scott and the producers of their podcast for inviting us onto theirs. It was such an honor. We are so thankful for that experience and the opportunity to talk to people about this show that we love and this podcast that we also love dearly. So it won't be weekly, but we will be back. We will have more coverage before season 3 for sure. Are we going to have to rewatch seasons 1 and 2 in once we get a season 3 premiere
At some
date?
point, yeah, I think
so.
Yeah.
I was listening back to a lot of
spoilers that time, though. We're going to do that full spoilers, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, I was listening back to a lot of our season 2 podcasts in preparing for this podcast, and I was like, we got a lot of stuff right. We some things we said that I was like, wow, we nailed that. But the thing is that when you throw a million things at the wall and some of them stick, I don't know that we can take.
It's my favorite thing about podcasting. It's
100%.
my favorite thing about podcasting. You just say a bunch of crazy stuff, and then that one time you're right, you cling on to that forever. Yeah, you hold that dear. Yep.
Yeah, nailed it. Like ignoring the fact that there's just like a pile of darts next to the dartboard.
Just
like,
so much spaghetti on the wall.
Got him. So we'll be back at some point. Keep sending in feedback. SeveranceRHAP@gmail.com. That's SeveranceRHAP@gmail.com. Don't just send your theories and feedback. If you've got ideas for off-season podcasts, we would love that. I think that we are at a point where we can start doing some top 10s and stuff of certain things.
Yeah.
I think that we can hand out some superlatives to season 2 if we want, though maybe that feels a little old already at this point. So the weirder, the wackier, the more specific, the better. If you want to send in any ideas, we would love to hear them. SeveranceRHAP@gmail.com, or you can hit us up in any of the avenues. You can find us on the internet. I'm at Round Howard. Melissa, where can people find you?
Melissa Woodward 28. Check out Whirlwind Pods if you're, like, oh no, gonna
Where'd
stop
you go?
gonna stop hearing the doctors pontificate about TV. Don't worry, there's plenty of that going on the internet. So all the usual stuff over on Whirlwind Podcasts. Basically lots of cool stuff going. We just released our 1-year anniversary of Whirlwind Podcast not that long ago. So lots of great stuff coming up in the next year. So check it all out.
Amazing. Dr. Amanda, where people find you?
You can find me on Blue Sky at Dr. Amanda R. And you can follow my other podcast at Cry Laugh Pod, Crying Laughing Podcast in your podcatcher of choice. We are going to be covering the season finale of White Lotus season 3. Very excited about that. Wow. And then beyond that, we have a Mad Men rewatch coming up in the future. So check us out, Crying Laughing Podcast, me and my co-host Ariel, talking about TV that makes us laugh and cry.
Well, this show certainly made us laugh and cry, as did this podcast. Thank you all for joining along week in and week out, talking all things Lumon with us. We will come back as soon as we have something more to discuss. In the meantime, check out all of those different places for podcasts. Tune in to WeKnowScriptedTV.com for more scripted coverage here at RHAP. We'll be back in the future. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.